Adani Enterprises Ltd. Campus Interview Preparation. Welcome back to the channel. Today, we're diving into one of the most important preparation guides for Adani Enterprises Ltd. Campus and off-campus interviews. Brief intro. Adani Enterprises Ltd. is the flagship company of the Adani Group, driving India-focused businesses in airports, roads, data centers, green energy, and mining services. Its India operations emphasize large-scale infrastructure development, nation-building projects, and incubation of high-growth ventures across critical sectors. These questions are gathered using web search and our internal database, so use them for preparation, but do check other topics from the channel playlist as well. Timestamps are in the description if you want to jump directly to a specific question. Let's begin. How would you evaluate the financial health of a diversified conglomerate like Adani Enterprises Ltd? Sample answer. I start by analyzing each business vertical separately because Adani Enterprises operates through mining, airports, roads, data centers, green hydrogen, and many SPVs. I review revenue growth, EBITDA margins, debt levels, and cash flow stability. Then I study project pipelines, CapEx intensity, and funding plans. Consolidated financials only tell part of the story. Real insight comes from segment-wise analysis and risk-adjusted returns. While answering, include points like segment-level analysis, cash flow review, and leverage assessment. Include points like segment-level analysis, cash flow review, and leverage assessment. Include points like segment-level analysis, cash flow review, and leverage assessment. What key financial risks exist in long-gestation infrastructure projects undertaken by Adani? Sample answer. Long-gestation projects face risks like high debt dependence, interest rate sensitivity, delays in approvals, land acquisition challenges, and uncertain future cash flows. Revenue often starts years after investment, so liquidity and cost overrun risks remain high. I also consider regulatory risks and political influences. While answering, include points like cost overruns, approval delays, and financing risks. What controls would you check when auditing mining operations under Adani Enterprises? Sample answer. I check weighbridge controls, material movement logs, contractor billing processes, royalty payments, and safety compliance. Inventory control at pithead stockyards is crucial. I also evaluate access controls to mining areas and equipment usage logs. While answering, include points like weighbridge controls, contractor checks, and royalty verification. Sample. How would you evaluate the accuracy of inventory valuation for mined materials? Sample answer. I check grade-wise production data, reconcile physical stock with system records, and validate valuation using cost of production models. I also assess overhead allocation and test for obsolete or low-quality ore. Variances between mining logs and ERP reports must be examined. While answering, include points like physical verification, costing logic, and reconciliation. What are the major audit risks in EPC contracts used by Adani for infra development? Sample answer. EPC projects have risks like incorrect milestone recognition, disputed claims, variation orders, subcontractor issues, and capitalisation errors. Cost overruns may be hidden through inflated CWIP. I also watch for aggressive revenue booking close to period end. While answering, include points like milestone accuracy, variation orders, and CWIP risk. How would you investigate cost overruns in a large infrastructure project? Sample answer. I compare original estimates with revised budgets, analyze delay causes, and review contractor correspondences. I test material consumption, equipment downtime, and labor productivity. Cost overruns must be separated into controllable and uncontrollable components. While answering, include points like variance analysis, delay review, and contractor documentation. What procedures would you perform to verify milestone-based billing and project revenue recognition? Sample answer. I check signed milestone certificates, engineer approvals, and physical progress evidence like site photos and reports. I match billed milestones with contract terms and ensure revenue is recognized only after performance is achieved. I also test retention money and unbilled revenue. While answering, include points like validating milestone proof, matching contracts, and testing retention. How would you evaluate impairment indicators for capital-intensive assets in Adani's portfolio? Sample answer. I monitor utilization levels, revenue performance, regulatory changes, cash flow deficits, and major negative market shifts. If indicators exist, I test recoverable value using value-in-use models. Capital-heavy assets like airports or data centers need regular review. While answering, include points like utilization checks, cash flow review, and regulatory impact. So on. What checks do you perform to validate contractor bills in mining or EPC operations? Sample answer. I verify measurements, progress reports, labor logs, vehicle GPS data, weighbridge slips, and approval workflows. I match billed quantities with actual delivery and contract terms. Duplicate or inflated claims are common risks. While answering, include points like measurement validation, bill to actual match, and approval verification. How would you assess internal controls at remote project sites? Sample answer. I evaluate segregation of duties, physical security, material handling controls, access to systems, and site-level documentation. Remote sites often have limited oversight, so strong preventive controls matter more than detective controls. While answering, include points like segregation checks, physical controls, and documentation review. How do you test completeness of capital work in progress for long-term projects? Sample answer. I match CWIP listings with project schedules, contractor bills, and site progress. I verify whether costs relate directly to construction and check for items wrongly expensed or capitalized. I also test aging of CWIP for stagnation. While answering, include points like matching CWIP with bills, testing eligibility, and checking aging. What steps would you take to review land acquisition costs and documentation? Sample answer. I verify title deeds, compensation payments, government approvals, and stamp duty records. I check valuation reports and ensure all legal conditions are fulfilled. Land purchases often involve disputes, so completeness of documentation is essential. While answering, include points like title verification, payment tracing, and legal compliance. How would you investigate mismatches between physical stock at mine sites and system records? Sample answer. I perform joint physical verification, review weighbridge logs, and reconcile production with dispatch records. I also check pilferage risks, grade variations, and manual interventions in ERP uploads. While answering, include points like physical counts, system reconciliation, and pilferage checks. How do you evaluate the reliability of project progress reports submitted by contractors? Sample answer. I cross-verify reports with site inspections, engineer logs, drone images, and material consumption. Progress overstating is common, so triangulating data from multiple sources is necessary. While answering, include points like cross-verification, physical inspection, and consumption patterns. What risks emerge when Adani operates through multiple SPVs and joint ventures? Sample answer. Risks include inconsistent policies, related party opacity, funding dependencies, guarantee exposures, and consolidation complexity. SPVs may hide stress unless monitored closely through cash flow tests. While answering, include points like funding risk, related party risk, and consolidation issues. How do you audit intercompany transactions and eliminations across the group? Sample answer. I reconcile balances across entities, match invoices, test pricing logic, and verify settlement status. For eliminations, I ensure reciprocal entries align in value and timing. Any mismatch can distort consolidated results. While answering include points like reconciliation, matching transactions, and timing checks. What checks would you perform when auditing long-term supply contracts for coal or raw materials? Sampled answer. I review contract terms, pricing formulas, penalties, delivery schedules, and take-or-pay clauses. I validate quantities with weighbridge data and test rate application. Long-term contracts influence cost structure, so accuracy is vital. While answering, include points like rate validation, quantity checks, and clause review. How would you assess the financial impact of delays in regulatory approvals for a new project? Sample answer. I calculate cost overruns, interest during delays, idle manpower costs, and lost revenue. I also analyze whether project IRR or payback changes significantly. Regulatory delays may also trigger impairment indicators. While answering, include points like cost of delay, IRR impact, and impairment triggers. How do you examine vendor selection and tendering processes for large CapEx projects? Sample answer. I check tender documents, evaluation criteria, bid comparisons, and approval hierarchies. I look for red flags like single vendor dependence or price anomalies. Proper tendering reduces procurement fraud risk. While answering, include points like tender checks, vendor evaluation, and approval review. What procedures would you perform to evaluate the effectiveness of risk management frameworks? Sample answer. I review the risk register, mitigation plans, periodic reviews, and board-level oversight. I test whether identified risks are updated with real-time data. A good framework should link operational risk to financial impact clearly. While answering, include points like risk register validation, mitigation testing, and governance review. How would you audit freight and logistics costs for coal movement or project cargo? Sample answer. I verify freight invoices, vessel railway receipts, GPS logs, and contract rates. I match logistics data with dispatch records and test demurrage or detention charges. Freight errors can significantly affect project costs. While answering, include points like matching invoices, validating routes, and testing rate application. How do you assess environmental and statutory compliance from a finance audit perspective? Sample answer. I verify pollution control certificates, emission reports, mining approvals, and statutory filings. I test provisioning for environmental obligations and evaluate penalties exposure. Non-compliance has heavy financial consequences. While answering, include points like certificate checks, provision review, and legal compliance. What checks do you perform to ensure accurate depreciation of heavy equipment and plant assets? Sample answer. I verify asset registers, useful life assumptions, commissioning dates, and component accounting. I test whether idle assets or prematurely retired assets are handled correctly. Heavy equipment depreciation has major P&L impact. While answering, include points like useful life validation, commissioning checks, and component accounting. How would you validate power consumption and energy efficiency metrics at industrial units? Sample answer. I reconcile power meter readings with production levels, cross-check tariff rates, and analyze abnormal spikes. Energy efficiency KPIs highlight operational issues, so consistency across months is important. While answering, include points like meter reconciliation, rate verification, and KPI analysis. What procedures would you run when auditing revenue from coal trading or natural resource supply? Sample answer. I verify contractual rates, dispatch documentation, quality certificates, and customer acknowledgements. I test cutoff, credit terms, and pricing linked to indices. Training revenue is prone to timing errors and classification issues. While answering include points like contract validation, dispatch proof, and cutoff accuracy. Scenario: you identify discrepancies in weighbridge data at mining or port locations. How do you investigate? Sample answer: I begin by comparing weighbridge logs with dispatch slips, ERP entries, and transporter records. Then I review CCTV footage, access logs, and calibration certificates for the weighbridge. I also check for manual overrides or unusual patterns in tare weights. Discrepancies may indicate pilferage, equipment error, or data tampering. So I isolate whether the issue is operational or intentional. While answering include points like cross-checking logs, validating calibration, and reviewing manual overrides. What controls should be reviewed in large-scale procurement for EPC and mining activities? Sample answer: I check vendor empanelment controls, tendering processes, bid evaluation steps, and approval hierarchies. I also test three-way matching of PO, GRN, and invoice. For mining, I verify contractor performance, fuel checks, and material consumption. Procurement leakage is a major risk when scale is large. While answering, include points like tender controls, approval workflows, and three-way matching. How would you evaluate financial viability of new business ventures like data centers or green hydrogen? Sample answer: I review projected demand, CapEx intensity, payback period, and long-term offtake assumptions. Then I assess technology risks, regulatory support, and sensitivity to energy costs. For green hydrogen, fuel sourcing and carbon credit assumptions are critical. Viability depends on whether projected cash flows justify the heavy upfront investment. While answering, include points like CapEx evaluation, demand forecasting, and sensitivity analysis. How do you assess working capital cycles in project-based businesses? Sample answer: I analyze receivable aging, milestone billing, retention money, contractor advances, and inventory at site. Project businesses often have long lock-in periods, so I track cash conversion cycles closely. I also compare planned versus actual billing schedules. While answering, include points like receivable aging, milestone timing, and retention checks. What checks are required when auditing foreign currency borrowings and hedging contracts? Sample answer: I validate loan agreements, test exchange rate application, and verify hedge documentation. Then I recalculate mark-to-market valuations and check OCI or P&L classification. I also assess hedge effectiveness and compliance with accounting standards. While answering, include points like validating agreements, testing FX rates, and checking hedge effectiveness. How would you examine project cash flows for early signs of financial stress? Sample answer: I compare budgeted cash flows with actual inflows and outflows. Then I analyze delays in billing, rising payables, cost overruns, and declining margins. Early stress shows up as stalled milestones or insufficient cash to pay contractors. I also test reliance on short-term borrowing. While answering, include points like budget to actual review, delay analysis, and liquidity checks. What procedures would you follow to audit project insurance claims and coverage adequacy? Sample answer: I examine insurance policies, verify declared asset values, and check exclusions. For claims, I match incident reports, surveyor findings, and claim settlement calculations. I ensure losses are recorded correctly and no double claims exist. While answering, include points like policy review, claim reconciliation, and verification of coverage. How do you test allocation of shared services or overheads across multiple business units? Sample answer: I verify allocation keys, such as headcount, revenue share, or usage hours. Then I test whether allocations are consistent, approved, and based on actual usage. Incorrect allocation can distort the profitability of SPVs or business units. While answering, include points like validating allocation basis, consistency checks, and approval review. What checks do you perform to validate long-term fuel supply agreements or coal linkage documentation? Sample answer. I review contract terms, pricing formulas, supply commitments, and penalty clauses. Then I verify quantities using production logs and transport records. Compliance with linkage requirements is critical to avoid penalties and shortages. While answering, include points like checking clauses, validating quantities, and testing compliance. How would you review contractor performance metrics for delay penalties and bonus calculations? Sample answer. I match scheduled timelines with actual progress, review engineer certifications, and check penalty or bonus clauses. I verify whether delays were due to contractor fault or external conditions. Financial impact depends on the accuracy of these assessments. While answering, include points like timeline comparison, clause validation, and engineer certification checks. How do you audit revenue linked to concession agreements in airports, ports, or logistics assets? Sample answer. I review concession terms, revenue share formulas, minimum guarantee payments, and performance obligations. I test revenue linked to passenger traffic, cargo tons, or throughput. I also validate third-party MIS data feeding revenue calculations. While answering, include points like checking concession terms, validating operational data, and testing revenue formulas. End quote. What procedures should be applied for impairment testing of underperforming SPVs? Sample answer. I test cash flow forecasts, discount rates, utilization assumptions, and regulatory factors. I compare carrying value with recoverable value using value in use or fair value models. SPVs with poor returns often need impairment review. While answering, include points like validating assumptions, testing models, and comparing recoverable value. How do you audit royalty and statutory payments in mining operations? Sample answer. I verify production data, royalty rates, payment challenge, and government approvals. I test the accuracy of quantity reports submitted to authorities and reconcile them with ERP data. Royalty errors can lead to penalties or litigation. While answering, include points like validating quantity, checking rates, and verifying challenge. What controls must be tested for cybersecurity and data integrity in diversified businesses? Sample answer. I check access rights, password policies, change management controls, data backup processes, and disaster recovery readiness. I also review logs for suspicious activity and test segregation of duties in systems. Cybersecurity failures can halt operations across multiple SPVs. While answering, include points like access control, backup checks, and monitoring logs. How would you investigate irregularities in project site expense claims? Sample answer. I verify supporting bills, cross-check supplier details, review cash withdrawal patterns, and match expenses with site activity. Sudden spikes or repetitive small-value claims are red flags. I also confirm whether expenses relate to actual project progress. While answering, include points like verifying documents, matching with site activity, and checking patterns. What checks do you perform when testing budget versus actual variances in infrastructure projects? Sample answer. I compare actual material, labor, and equipment usage with budgets. Then I analyze reasons for deviations, such as price escalation, delays, or technical issues. I also check whether revised budgets were approved properly. While answering, include points like variance analysis, price and usage checks, and approval review. How would you review compliance with ESG and sustainability reporting requirements? Sample answer. I evaluate carbon emission reporting, energy usage data, waste management compliance, and social impact initiatives. I check whether disclosures match internal reports and regulatory filings. ESG accuracy is crucial for large conglomerates with public exposure. While answering, include points like data validation, regulatory checks, and disclosure accuracy. What steps would you take to validate third-party inspection and quality reports? Sample answer. I verify inspector credentials, check visit logs, match reports with physical conditions, and cross-check sample testing certificates. Third-party reports often determine milestone payments, so reliability is essential. While answering, include points like verifying inspector authenticity, matching with site data, and validating test results. How do you assess risk around large intercompany funding and guarantees? Sample answer. I analyze funding flows, guarantee exposure, debt servicing ability of SPVs, and covenant compliance. I check whether guarantees are approved at the right authority level. Large guarantees increase group-level financial risk. While answering, include points like cash flow checks, covenant review, and approval validation. How would you audit subcontractor relationships for potential conflicts of interest? Sample answer. I verify vendor backgrounds, check related party links, review impanelment approvals, and analyze unusual pricing. I also look for repeated awards to the same subcontractor without competitive bidding. While answering, include points like vendor background checks, pricing review, and related party screening. What checks should be performed to audit fuel consumption by heavy machinery and mining fleets? Sample answer. I reconcile fuel issue logs with machine hours, GPS tracking, and output metrics. I test consumption against norms and investigate any abnormal variance. Fuel pilferage is a known risk in mining fleets. While answering, include points like reconciling logs, comparing with norms, and checking GPS data. How do you test accuracy of port or airport volume-based billing, such as cargo tons, passengers, or ship calls? Sample answer. I reconcile traffic records with billing registers, validate system-generated MIS, and check third-party confirmations. For cargo, I verify weighbridge or container handling logs. For airports, I validate passenger counts with security checkpoint data. While answering, include points like reconciling MIS, validation with third-party sources, and checking operational logs. End. What controls would you review when auditing digital operations and new-age businesses within Adani? Sample answer. I evaluate data governance controls, access management, system integration checkpoints, and cybersecurity protocols. For digital platforms, I validate API controls and transaction logs. Tech-led businesses need stronger automated controls. While answering, include points like access controls, cybersecurity checks, and integration testing. How would you evaluate project governance frameworks for mega infrastructure initiatives? Sample answer. I examine project charter documentation, milestone review processes, escalation mechanisms, and stakeholder reporting. Governance strength is visible when deviations are identified early and acted upon. Strong governance directly prevents cost overruns. While answering, include points like governance structure, milestone reviews, and escalation pathways. How do you plan audit coverage for multiple SPVs and large-scale diversified operations under tight timelines? Sample answer. I prioritize high-risk SPVs, standardize sampling, and use materiality filters. I deploy teams based on risk clusters and maintain a central tracker for deadlines. Tight timeline audits need strong planning and cross-team communication. While answering, include points like risk prioritization, standardization, and central monitoring.